Hi, everyone. I would like to welcome you to today's webinar, How New Data Shows the Pathway for Ending Child Poverty. I'm Cara Balderi, Vice President of Family Economics at First Focus on Children, and we are a bipartisan children's advocacy group that's dedicated to making children and families the priority in federal budget and policy decisions. First Focus is also the founding member of the U.S. Child Poverty Action Group, a partnership of child-focused organizations that are dedicated to ending child poverty in the U.S. And you can find more about our work at our website, endchildpovertyus.org. So we're thrilled today to be co-hosting this discussion on what new census data tells us about the impact of COVID-19 on child poverty and why Congress needs to act now to build on the progress we've made so far. We know that as the pandemic rages on, it continues to have an outsized impact on households with children, especially children of color, as families with children are suffering higher rates of poverty and material hardship, and young children continue to be ineligible for vaccination. However, recent data released by the U.S. Census Bureau and Columbia Center on Poverty and Social Policy give us reason for optimism and show that even amid a global pandemic, we can reduce child poverty in the U.S. and improve children's long-term outcomes through responding with cash transfers, income supports, and nutrition assistance that help parents and caregivers provide resources that support their children's healthy development. 2020 census data released earlier this month tells us that despite a loss of income that many households with children experienced last year, child poverty decreased from 2019 when considering the impact of stimulus and other assistance, including the first two rounds of economic impact payments, expansions to unemployment insurance benefits, nutrition assistance through the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, or SNAP, and the pandemic EBT program, and more. Some of this emergency relief has since expired, but in March 2021, Congress passed the American Rescue Plan. Thanks to analysis from Columbia Center on Poverty and Social Policy, we know that these investments are nearly cutting child poverty in half this year. Improvements to the child tax credit are responsible for much of this reduction, reaching families with the greatest level of hardship for the first time in the child tax credit's history, with increased amounts of up to $300 a month for children under 6, and $250 a month for children ages 6 to 17. Half of this assistance is being delivered to households to children monthly from July through December this year, with the rest coming at tax time. These payments are already reducing child poverty by 30%, which equals about 3.5 million fewer children experiencing poverty, and this impact will hopefully increase as more eligible families are able to access their CTC payments. Yet without further action, these improvements are due to expire at the end of 2021, which may cause child poverty to double and raise taxes on over 60 million households with children. As we're holding this webinar, Congress is negotiating a spending package, which you might have heard referred to as Build Back Better, that includes provisions to continue these enhancements as well as other significant investments in childcare, children's health care, and more, potentially making this one of the most important pieces of legislation for children in a generation. It is imperative that Congress prioritize children in this package, but even then, we know our work is not over. Child poverty is a long-term problem in need of a long-term solution, and even with improvements to the child tax credit, many children are still experiencing poverty, racial inequities persist, and even families with incomes double the poverty line are struggling to put food on the table and pay rent. This is why the U.S. Child Poverty Action Group has long advocated for the establishment of a national child poverty target through the passage of the Child Poverty Reduction Act, so we can have the accountability and research necessary to not only maintain recent progress in reducing child poverty, but build upon it beyond these emergency relief efforts. So we're going to dig into all this more, but I first want to provide some logistics and introduce our panel. Please note that all attendees are muted. This webinar is being recorded, and we will distribute the recording as well as all of the slides and handouts afterwards. Note that there's some handouts attached at the bottom of your toolbar that you can download, and that these provide more detail on what we will be hearing today, including a fact sheet from First Focus and the U.S. Child Poverty Action Group on new child poverty data, as well as some of the analysis that Megan will be discussing from Columbia Center on Poverty and Social Policy. So on to our great panel. Megan Curran is the Policy Director at Columbia's University Center on Poverty and Social Policy, and I am proud to mention that she is also a First Focus alumni. Jacqueline Seeley is a parent of 3 in Niagara Falls, New York, and a volunteer at Moms Rising. Michelle Dallafor is the Senior Vice President of Budget and Tax Policy at First Focus on Children. Miriam Abaya is the Senior Director of Immigration and Children's Rights at First Focus on Children. And Olivia Gomez is the Assistant Director of Health Policy and Research at First Focus on Children. Also for a few other logistics, all the materials will be sent out as well after this panel, but you can also get them on our website at endchildpovertyus.org under the events tab. And we will be taking questions mostly at the end. If you don't have time to submit your question or we don't get to it, you can email me directly at Cara B, C as in cat, ARA, B as in boy at firstfocus.org. And I'll try to follow up to get those answers to you. You can also feel free to share anything you've learned today via Twitter using the hashtag #EndChildPoverty. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Megan.
Okay, thanks very much, Cara. And thanks so much to First Focus and the Child Poverty Action Group for having me. As Cara mentioned, I'm a very proud First Focus alum, so it's really nice to join everyone here today. So I'm just going to speak a little bit about what the census released earlier this month, what it does tell us, but also what it does not tell us in terms of where we are today in close to October 2021. And what else we can use to try and get a handle on the impact of policy on child poverty in closer to real time. So if you can advance the slide. One of the just first things that many of you may already be well familiar with, but it's always nice before we jump into talk about numbers and data to just make sure everyone's on the same page. We know that, earlier this month, the U.S. Census Bureau did their annual release of the income, health insurance, and poverty information that they collect. So this is usually collected every March, and it asks families about what their resource situation was in their household the year prior. So information that was collected in March 2021 was asking families about the entirety of 2020. What was happening, how much money did they have, how much support did they receive potentially from other benefits. There are calculators to figure out how much, that the census has to figure out how much tax they might have had, and therefore that, not to include that in what they assume is their disposable income. But right now, the census releases 2 types of poverty measures. The first is the official poverty measure, sometimes referred to as OPM. This may what come to mind to a lot of people. This is what the census has been calculating ever since the 1960s. It's a pretty straightforward measure in that it just is limited to basically cash income that comes into the house. That does include Social Security and things like that. And it could be pensions if someone is retired and not working. But it is tagged, to a level that, essentially kind of came originally from figuring out how much a family spent on food each year for their household, and then multiplying that by about 3. And so when we talk about being in poverty, we're talking about whether a family was above or below a certain income threshold. For the official poverty measure, this is a uniform threshold no matter where you live in the country. It is adjusted by whether or not you have, multiple adults in the household or multiple children, or if you're a single person. But otherwise, if you live in New York City where it's very expensive, or you live in a more rural area, say in the Midwest or in the South, it's the same threshold for your household size. So in 2020, if you were a 2-parent, 2-adult-child household, we're talking about whether or not you had income above $26,000 roughly for the entire year. Now, there is also, as many of you will be well familiar, for about the last decade or so, the U.S. Census Bureau has also been producing what's called the Supplemental Poverty Measure, or the SPM. The SPM has a lot of advantages when we actually want to understand the impact of policy, which I think is pretty much why we're all here today. Because the SPM, accounts for the same sorts of cash income, pension, Social Security, and things that the official poverty measure does, but it also accounts for a wider range of benefits. Some are, sort of near cash, like SNAP or food assistance. Some are non-cash. It could be sort of childcare. It could be school lunches. It could be housing assistance, housing vouchers, things like that. So it captures sort of the greater totality of the resources that a family might have, but it also makes sure that it doesn't count money that families don't have to spend on themselves. So it doesn't, it accounts for taxes that are out the door. It accounts for necessary expenses that go out the door. And it also is important because the amount of money that you have to be above or below the SPM threshold also accounts for where you live in the country. So if you live in a higher cost area like New York City, where I'm based at the moment, there's a little bit of a higher income threshold. If you live in a lower cost area, it will be adjusted downward. The national average for 2020, again, for that 2-adult, 2-child household, was whether or not that family had at least $30,000 for the year. But as you can see from that map, that the exact income threshold does change. You can move the slide. So why is this important, basically? Oh, it looks like some of my coloring is a little bit off on this slide, but it's important to know here because the official poverty measure and the supplemental poverty measure, they're two different measurements, so they're going to give you two different poverty rates. For children, this has really mattered over time. And unfortunately, on the left-hand slide here, one of these lines was meant to be blue so that you could actually see a difference. The official poverty measure going back to the late 1960s would be this line here that starts on the bottom, but unfortunately you can't see it actually ends up on the top. The supplemental poverty measure, if you look back in time, which many of my colleagues, a team of researchers at Columbia actually traced the SPM back to 1967, so you could do this comparison, even though the census has only been producing it for the last 10 years or so. The SPM actually started much higher than the OPM if you look back in time, but this is actually the SPM line now for children. It would have been blue to carry on here. This looks up until about 2012. And what you see basically is that because the official poverty measure doesn't capture all of the nuances of the tax and transfer system, and taxes and transfers have played a much bigger role in recent decades than they did earlier in the 20th century, that the picture that we get of poverty is starting to differ depending on which measure you use. And so you see in much more recent years here, this is from the Census Bureau's most recent report, for child poverty from 2009 up until just last year, 2020, the supplemental poverty measure is measured by this bottom blue line, and the official poverty measure is in that orange line at the top. You can see that, interestingly, in 2020, there was a sharper divergence than there has been even in recent years, where it looked like child poverty measured under the official poverty measure went up. So more children were living in poverty under that measure when you only count the amount of cash, essentially, that a family has in the household. But when you account for a fuller range of supports, other types of food assistance, housing assistance, these stimulus checks that families received last year, and you account for taxes and things like that, you actually see that child poverty in 2020 went down even further. So the gap between these two measures for children in last year has really been kind of greater than it has been in a long time. And so it really does matter which measure that you're using. You can advance the slide. So essentially, as researchers, when we're trying to understand what poverty looks like, but also what the impact of policy is, Researchers tend to use the SPM, the Supplemental Poverty Measure. It's a really useful tool when you're actually trying to get a sense of a more complete picture. It's by no means perfect, but it does have a lot of advantages over the official poverty measure in this sense. And so if you happen to read the Census Bureau report that came out a couple of weeks ago, you'll see always on page 1, they give you just a nice image of the recent sort of year-on-year comparison. And so you get to see immediately, did poverty rise or fall for the whole population in the US from the prior year, and what happened in particular age groups, children, working age adults, and seniors. And we see actually right off the bat that child poverty dropped significantly between 2019 and 2020. What this equated, there are some tables towards the end of the Census Bureau report. What this equated to is essentially more than 2 million fewer children living in SPM poverty in 2020 than 2019. This is not the type of poverty drop that we see in regular years. So it would be, kind of a really big deal anytime, but it was an extremely big deal because we all know that 2020 was essentially chaotic for many people, and definitely for the economy. And so what this is showing us is essentially that policy mattered. You can advance the slide. So again, I know that the first focus fact sheet will have sort of much nicer and more easily accessible information. The Census Bureau produces, again, a version of this chart every year that you see on the left. And you can actually see the impact of particular individual policies. When the bar is going to the left, that's talking about in millions of people, how many people were kept out of poverty due to that policy. So Social Security usually tops the list. It kept almost 27 million individuals from poverty, mostly older adults last year. But you do see that the sort of list of policies here got a little bit of a reshuffle. First of all, economic impact payments, or the stimulus checks, were now the number 2 policy that kept families out of poverty last year. Those don't exist in other years. And so this is a new addition, but it made a huge difference. It kept nearly 12 million individuals from poverty. Unemployment insurance usually features much lower down in the list. It keeps usually in normal times, a much smaller percentage of people. But we know that there were really meaningful expansions to unemployment insurance, and also that unemployment, reached some historic highs, especially for certain population groups. And so unemployment insurance really stepped in as a massive anti-poverty tool in 2020. Refundable tax credits are, always feature very highly. This would be the earned income tax credit and the child tax credit. But again, here we're seeing SNAP and school lunch, where we had some really important improvements with pandemic EBT payments that also featured importantly up here. What is important to note, though, is that, this poverty information from the census always comes out with a time lag. As I mentioned at the start, the information is collected every year in March about the year prior, but we don't actually receive this information then in public versions until September of that year. And so basically in September 2021, we're getting the picture of what 2020 looked like for families. It's really useful information. It's great to know exactly the tangible hard numbers of what these policies did, because we knew that they were doing important work, but it's great to have kind of the proof here. But it's also, it can be hard to kind of wrap your heads around the impact that was happening then and square it with what's happening now, because so much time has passed. Another full 9 months has passed. And in sort of COVID life, that's quite a lot of time, because we've still been dealing with the pandemic and the economic crisis, and we've had many, many, many policy changes and proposals and debates since. So just, I just put together a little quick list here. It's not exhaustive, but what we do see counted in these numbers here would be the first 2 rounds of the stimulus checks. The unemployment benefits that were available in 2020, so that would have been that $600 a week top up, for example, that was available for a good chunk of 2020, but not all of 2020. Pandemic EBT and a few other increases. These numbers do not reflect the fact that there was a third round of stimulus checks in 2021, that SNAP was increased in a different way with a 15% benefit increase across the board in 2021, that unemployment benefits were again expanded, sort of the weekly supplement was reinstated at $300 a week level. And of course, it does not count the fact that we've had one of the most potentially transformative policies for kids introduced just in the last couple of months. These numbers don't yet reflect the new monthly child tax credit payments. You can advance the slide. So what is useful to show here is what my colleagues and I at Columbia have been doing over the past year and a half now, is trying to essentially build on what the census does and try and keep up a little bit more in real time with what's happening. So rather than take an annual look, like what the census was just released recently, we have been trying to develop monthly poverty rates. Again, in normal economic times, the monthly poverty rate for families wouldn't necessarily change that much, if it was May versus August. But it's made a really big difference basically what month you've been in over the course of the pandemic. We know, of course, that when the CARES Act was in full swing, there was quite a lot of support available for families. When a lot of provisions of those expired at the end of 2020, it was a different story. And so you can see these are child poverty rates from January 2020 through August 2021, just last month. The top line, which is in dark blue, shows what child poverty could have been over the course of the pandemic had we just had still the regular safety net in place, but there had been no provisions for COVID relief. You would have seen this really sharp spike in child poverty around April of 2020 when the lockdowns were probably in their most strictest form at the beginning of the emergency. But the lighter blue bar, which is tracing the across the bottom of the chart, shows what child poverty, what we estimated to actually have been in each month because COVID relief was put in place. And you'll see that when you can see a real difference when different pieces of the safety net come into force. So in the March of 2020 and March of 2021, those are a little bit of anomalies because that's when families would have received the bulk of their refunds, their EITC payments and their old child tax credit payments when it came once a year. So there's kind of an infusion of cash into the household in those months. But the rest of the time, you can see that the fact that the CARES Act was enacted staved off what could have been kind of the worst rise in poverty that we would have seen in 50 years in the US. It kept child poverty, much lower than it would have been throughout the spring and early summer. But of course, then we started to see it plateau at a much higher rate for the end of 2020 when a lot of those supports went away. We saw a lot of drops, though, again, when Congress took action, again, with the December relief bill. And of course, with the American Rescue Plan, we've seen the most recent child poverty drops at the very end of this chart here when the first child tax credit payments have come in. You can advance. So what we have been doing, my colleagues and I at the Columbia Center on Poverty and Social Policy have been trying to assess this running sort of impact of, again, some of this most important recent relief. And many other organizations are doing really important work in this space as well. So using our monthly poverty tracker, this has been a really useful tool to see in real time what happens with the policy changes. And so again, at that very end of the graph on the previous one, where we saw a precipitous drop in child poverty, what this actually meant is that the child tax credit alone, that first payment in July that rolled out as part of the new program, actually kept 3 million children from living in poverty just in its first month. If we know that using the Supplemental Poverty Measure, if we had taken away the child tax credit within that measurement, 3 million more children would have been in poverty. So the child tax credit alone did that piece. We also know that it's been reducing hardship among families substantially, particularly with related to food insufficiency. But we continue to do this tracking. And so we just released our August poverty numbers just at the very end of last week. And we found that the second child tax credit payment in August actually kept even more children from poverty. It kept 3.5 million children from poverty in August, and that's 500,000 more children than it did in July. And that's because we know from Treasury that the child tax credit reached more children in its second payment because rollout continues to improve. So this is an example of policy making a real difference in real time, and also a measurement that we hope is helpful to try and give a bit of evidence to its effects here. You can advance the slide. So just to say that if you want to keep up with these data, we release them regularly. You can find it on our monthly poverty data and get versions of those graphs for children, but also by race and ethnicity, or for older folks, or for the whole US population. You can download and make your own charts, or you can use the ones that we have available there. And you can also see those lines for, if there had been no COVID relief or with COVID relief and things like that. We do hope that you will, continue to check in with us and see, but also there are many other groups that are producing some really useful work. I can give a shout out to Washington University has some state-by-state fact sheets on how families have been using the child tax credit and things like that. So there are many groups that are doing really good work to try and track the impact of ongoing relief efforts. But it's also important to know that sometimes measuring poverty on the annual basis with the time lag is an imperfect tool, and so we can supplement some of that evidence with some more up-to-date information. Thanks, Kara.
Great, thank you. Thank you so much, Megan, for that. So next, we are hopefully going to hear if we have Jacqueline Story on to kind of hear firsthand how these child tax credit payments are really making an impact, for her family and families around the country. So, Jacqueline, do we have you on? Okay. Well, while we're waiting for Jacqueline to join us,
yes,
Megan. Oh, great. Hey, Jacqueline.
Hi. How are you doing?
Good. How are you? Thank you so much for joining and telling your story and sharing your expertise.
Oh, you're very welcome. Thank you so much for having me join.
Great. Well, if you just want to go ahead and get started, we'd love to hear from you.
Am I on video or?
Nope. I think we just hear you, which is that's totally fine.
Okay. All right. Well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jacqueline Story, and I'm joining today from Niagara Falls, New York. I'm a proud member of the Moms of Rising and I'm a proud member of Moms of Rising and a mom of 3 incredible children who keep me very busy. I have a 1-year-old, a 5-year-old, and an 8-year-old. I appreciate the opportunity to share my expanded child tax credit means so much for my family. So as a mom of 3, trying to find work while taking care of 3 kids has been a struggle, especially we don't have childcare. And I live in a rural area, in a rural community where there's a lot of high quality childcare options available. And there's no way that we can afford the extremely high cost of the programs that we have open spots available to us. So childcare is just one, like childcare for my family is just as much as a rent payment. My husband is a PCA, a personal care aide, and I'm a call center agent. And we try to work around each other's schedules so that one of us is available to take care of our children at all times. It's a huge headache and significantly limits our income. We go through so many different iterations of work and care, but it's a puzzle piece that will never really fit. It's made it difficult to advance in our careers, and it's exhausting, and we struggle to make ends meet. Right now, I'm not working, so I care for our kids. We practically live paycheck to paycheck, trying to keep our family afloat. We work hard, but we barely make enough to pay for our essential living expenses. And there are certain days where we don't even know how we're going to make it to the next. And that's a huge amount of stress. And some days it feels like all we can do is trust in God. That's why the advanced monthly child tax credit payments are such a huge relief for us. The extra $850 a month gives us much more room to breathe. For us, it's going straight towards essentials like rent, utilities, and healthy groceries. Even extra activities like cheerleading and dance for my daughter or basketball and football for my sons. It means we don't have to worry so much about how we'll make it from one paycheck to the next. I'm so glad Congress and the Biden administration made this long overdue investment in children and families. It's making a huge difference right now for my family, and I really hope lawmakers make the expansion permanent. And I'm proud to fight for that as a member of the Moms Rising. After all, raising kids brings so many extra expenses, especially when they're little. Whether it's childcare, diapers, or clothes, they always seem to be outgrowing. Families like mine need support long before the pandemic hit. I'm counting on our elected leaders to ensure we will have it in the future. We also need Congress to make bold investments in childcare so all parents can find and afford quality care we need to hold jobs and give our kids strong starts and ensure childcare providers earn a living wage. Children are our future, and it's important we make sure they have what they need to be successful. I remember being a kid not wanting to ask my parents for after school activities because I knew they were struggling. Kids observe so much. They know what we're going through even when we try to protect them from it. The reconciliation package can mean fewer children grow up feeling the sense of worry. We can make the expanded child tax credit permanently available for families, for all families. We can address the child care crisis. We can guarantee paid leave and medical leave for all. And in short, we can build the care infrastructure families need to thrive. I hope lawmakers will take advantage of this moment to do all that for working families. Thank you.
Thank you so much again, Jacqueline, for sharing your story, for your expertise, for doing this work with Moms Rising. So, we all can hear and members of Congress can hear about the importance of, these child tax credit payments, the importance of affordable childcare for, your family and for so many others. So thank you for sharing your story.
You're welcome.
I want to, I want to encourage if people have questions, either for Megan or for Jacqueline, they could start putting them in the question box. But, Jacqueline, just while we have you, I know you talked about this a bit. If you just don't mind elaborating, or mentioning again kind of why, having these payments monthly has been so helpful to your family.
Well, currently right now, as I said before, I'm not working. So it's definitely a huge relief to have these payments come in because they go, like I said, to rent, to car notes for us to get back and take our kids back and forth to school, and electric bills, essential bills, even food on the table. It definitely helps a lot. Right now I'm in the brink of looking for a job. So it's kind of like another income coming in. Especially in this time where we're, finding a job is very hard during the COVID, meeting all the requirements they want you to have nowadays. It's definitely helpful.
Great, thanks for sharing that. Is there anything, any advice you have, for others who might be looking to spread the word about these payments, whether for families who might be, eligible but not receiving them, or just, any advice you have to, ensure people kind of know about this help?
I encourage people, either if they're not receiving them, to kind of research and try to get a hold of the agencies that are helping people get the payments to them, like on the portal, on the IRS portal, as well as just help is out there. We just have to speak up. We have to get in touch with the right people, to help us, but if you search, you will find.
Thank you. Yeah. And so, I hope that there are staff from, congressional offices who are on this and hearing you, and we'll make sure to share this story. So, as these decisions are, being made, that people making the decisions are hearing from you. So thanks so much. Do you have anything else you want to make sure that people hear?
The children are our future. So, I mean, as long as our kids is being raised, and as long as they're not dealing with the stress of having the struggle, it makes life so much easier for us raising our kids, and it makes being a kid easier, So they're our future, and if they're being raised well, they're going to be successful. They're going to be set out into the world to be successful, and to share what we call love. It's hard. It's hard. It's hard trying to teach love when there's so many obstacles around us that kind of build brick walls. So it's kind of hard to just, I don't know how to word it. It's easier when it's easier to give everything that your child needs. It's easier. It's way easier. If you're not able to do that, it just becomes a stress on the parents, and then again, it falls on the kids. So it trickles down. It's a trickle down effect.
Absolutely. I know I don't think you could see me, but I'm nodding along to everything you're saying. So thank you so much again for sharing your story. You, of course, are welcome, and we'd love for you to stay on if you want to with us, but also understand if you have to go.
Yeah.
And thanks again. We'll make sure your story is getting heard.
You're very welcome, and I'll be sitting and listening.
Wonderful. Great. Well, if people have any additional questions for Jacqueline, then please share them in the Q&A box. And with that, we're going to start then our policy roundtable with some of my colleagues at First Focus. So, we can hear about what we need to do to make sure kids are prioritized in this package that's being negotiated, the spending package, and ways that we can take action. So if my colleagues want to join me to share. Great. Okay, great. Well, Michelle, as our tax guru, do you want to build on what we just heard from Megan and Jacqueline, and kind of, why it's so important for Congress to be extending the child tax credit improvements to make sure families can continue to receive these payments? And, I'll mention is that, we know from research from the Urban Institute that, if all families who are eligible for these payments are able to reach them, in 2021, that, child poverty historically, right, children have had the highest poverty rates, and this would flip that and actually could give children the lowest poverty rates in our country. So just to show the impact, right? So, yeah, so why is it so important? What do we need to do?
Thanks, Kara. And I want to say thank you to Jacqueline as well. And I might repeat some of what you've already heard from her. And then Megan, as always, thank you. You did a great job with the numbers. So I won't spend a ton of time on that. Instead, Kara, I'm going to repeat how you opened up, and just that child poverty is a persistently stubborn problem in this country, and it has been for a long time. And as you said earlier, Kara, it requires a long-term, bold, comprehensive solution. And I think building off the National Academy study, the landmark study that came out in the winter of 2019, a roadmap to reducing child poverty, very clearly said, we can do that. We can cut child poverty in half, and we can do it in less than a decade, and we have the policy tools to do that. Now, fast forward, we're seeing some of the proof, to use Megan's noun, of what the difference is when we make improvements to a program that can significantly address child poverty, such as the child tax credit. And then the other thing I would add too is we're we are at a very pivotal moment where we have strong leadership in the White House that came out early and proposed the American Rescue Plan, and then shortly thereafter, the Build Back Better plan that has numerous investments in children's programs that touches all the different aspects of their lives. So that leadership is there. We have amazing champions in both the House and Senate, including the Speaker of the House, who continue to really push to see that this significant policy change, the child tax credit improvements, are made permanent. So I know Jacqueline already said this, but I will underscore that we also know from the national academies that when we invest in children and these cash transfers, there are long-term positive outcomes for children. Better health, better educational outcomes, and the potential earning outcomes are more positive. So we know all that, and an important thing that she talked about too was the stress factor. And it matters for the parents and the caregivers, as well as the children. They can be kids, as she was saying, when there's less stress in the household. The parents have more emotional and mental energy to give to caring for their children. So those are important. But two of the big policy things, and Jacqueline talked a lot about this, is just the importance of the regular monthly payments and the flexibility and the security, that a little bit of security that is offered by those payments, and even being able to plan for unique needs of your family into the future. That is hugely significant. And then another policy lever I will point out and let my other colleagues chime in here, but is the full refundability. I can't stress the importance of that provision enough. Prior to the American Rescue Plan, about a third of the nation's children were not eligible for the child tax credit because they were in households where their parents or caregivers didn't meet the earnings requirements. And disproportionately, that left behind Black and Hispanic children. We've changed that now. And now all children are, not all children, but we're getting closer to all children are eligible regardless of income. And that is a very, very important provision. And so then I would just end by saying, I think the momentum for the political will to get this done is there. I think our lawmakers are understanding the benefits and why we need to tackle this stubbornly persistent problem. So thanks for putting this all together.
Great, thanks, Michelle. So, Olivia, we know that, nutrition assistance made a huge impact, but we know that families, right, are still experiencing high rates of food insecurity and hunger. So, can you talk about that a little more and what we need to do about it and what Congress should do about it?
Yeah, definitely. Thank you, Kara. Yeah, so I first want to just touch upon the fact that the recent food security data that came out shows there was a significant increase among food insecurity in households with children, in Black households, and also in Southern households. So there's definitely groups that are disproportionately impacted by the resulting economic crisis from the pandemic. But I think what we can note from those increases is that they would have been a lot higher if we hadn't had that aid from the pandemic. I know that's not reflected in the measure right now, but the boost to SNAP and also school meals have been a great way of getting food to children. It's like one of the main sources for children to get healthy meals. So definitely would have been a lot higher without those, but they're not reaching as many people as they can. Like I said, disproportionately impacting children of color and different areas of the country. So in the current reconciliation package, Congress is leading some policy changes that could help reach more children in school meals by improving the reach and accessibility of free and reduced price school meals. They're also they want to make permanent summer EBT, which is would help to get meals to students in the summer when school's out of session. We learned how successful pandemic EBT, which is another reason why probably a lot of kids weren't food insecure. It really helped get food on the table for a lot of children. So I think those are the two main ways that Congress could make lasting change to reduce food insecurity for children. Coming up in the next, we'll see how the negotiations go. But I would say overall, I think just improving access to SNAP even more than it is now. The Biden administration did just update the Thrifty Food Plan, so more people are going to get more money on their benefit cards to help pay for rising food prices across the country. But again, we need to improve the reach of that so more people that need it are getting it. Also, and Miriam can touch upon this, access for immigrant families and getting them the benefits that they are eligible for. And also, I'll just mention that universal school meals, which is something that is in Congress right now, we're getting closer to it with some of the policy changes they've made recently, but that would really help reach as many kids as we can to get them school meals, which, like I said, is one of the main places where kids can get meals. So yeah, that's where I'll stop. I think I answered your question, but yeah.
No, great, thanks. And I appreciate you mentioning not only, right, what Congress is kind of negotiating within the reconciliation package, but beyond, right, such as improvements to the Thrifty Food Plan, because we know, again, we need to go beyond, right, and do more. So thanks for that. So Miriam, what should we be doing to make sure that children and immigrant families are able to access, some of the assistance? We heard that's making an impact, both efforts in the reconciliation package, but again, beyond, what else is needed?
Thanks, Kara. Yeah, so I'll start by kind of describing who these children and families are and what the pandemic impact has been. So children of immigrants make up a quarter of all children in the United States, and over 5 million of these kids have a parent who is undocumented, and the vast majority of them are US citizens. So as Jacqueline said earlier, kids are our present and our future, and that includes children and immigrant families. But because of these children's their parent status, generally, these families are forced into lower income jobs, and they don't have access to the benefits like tax credits and other supports that Megan and others have talked about that have been beneficial to families. So in data recently analyzed by the Children Thrive Action Network, found that 34% of US citizen kids with an undocumented parent live in poverty. This is more than double the national poverty rate. And Michelle has already talked about, what the research shows about the impact on kids when their family doesn't have sufficient economic support. So immigrant families were hit in the exact same ways that other families were when it came to the pandemic. However, because of harmful policies, they were blocked from some of these benefits. So one really big policy that was in place starting in 2019 was the public charge rule. So the Trump administration finalized a rule that penalized immigrant families for using public benefits that they or their children might be eligible for, and essentially established a wealth test to access a green card. And this policy stayed in place during a lot of the pandemic. And because of this policy, many families avoided benefits like healthcare, nutrition assistance, housing supports, and many of them actually avoided benefits that didn't count towards public charge, including pandemic benefits like pandemic EBT and unemployment insurance. And also, a lot of these families were excluded from COVID-19 relief measures like the stimulus payments, which Megan showed us had really, really critical impacts on families during the pandemic. And in fact, until the third round of checks, US citizen kids were excluded from those checks because of their parents' status. So a good thing is that the public charge rule is no longer in effect. I think one of the things that the Biden administration really has to ramp up is outreach to families, making clear that this policy is no longer in place, and making sure that all these families who are eligible for benefits get access. But also what's needed is really, really big change. And one of those really big things that needs to happen is a pathway to citizenship for undocumented families. So currently in the Build Back Better plan that is before Congress, there is a pathway to citizenship. And this means a lot of things for families. It means parents can get more secure, higher paying jobs. It means that families would gain access to the supports that we've been talking about that are proven to lift kids out of poverty, like the child tax credit and the EITC and other supports. And also based on the research that I mentioned earlier from the Children Thrive Action Network, a pathway to citizenship would lift 250,000 kids, so 250,000 children out of poverty. And a lot of these kids, their parents served as essential workers during the pandemic, so they have served their communities in so many ways. And it's really important that a pathway to citizenship stay in the Build Back Better plan so that all of these benefits are felt, and so that children, a lot of these US citizen children, are on equal playing fields to their peers, so they all get the access to the benefits that we've been talking about. Another important provision that I'll just briefly talk about is restoring access to the child tax credit for kids with individual taxpayer identification numbers, or ITINs. So before the 2017 Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, approximately 1 million kids who were undocumented themselves had access to the child tax credit. And after that bill was passed, children lost that benefit. And that means that immigrant children and their families have been excluded from all of the benefits of the extended child tax credit that Megan and others have talked about so far. However, this provision expires in 2025, and Congress has an opportunity right now to make sure that immigrant kids aren't left behind, that all kids have access to the benefits for themselves and their families and their economy. So all that, alongside making the CTC permanent and fully refundable, Congress also needs to move up this expiration date from 2025 to the minute they pass that bill, and restore access to the CTC for these kids. So I'll stop there.
Great, thank you. Well, I'm going to touch upon, what I discussed in the beginning and how the idea of a child poverty target can help, right, in moving forward all of the policies we just discussed, and then give a chance for you guys, if there's anything you want to leave the audience with as things they could do to kind of take action right now, right, to weigh in with their members of Congress around all of these priorities. So, I'll mention that, the U.S. Child Poverty Action Group formed in 2016 with the idea that we need a national child poverty target to really have some accountability around the idea of prioritizing child poverty reduction in this country. And so, we know that the progress we've seen under the American Rescue Plan, and hopefully the progress we'll see as a result of this reconciliation package, is so important, and we need to be pushing right now, right, to make sure that that package is robust as possible for kids. But we also know that our work doesn't stop there, right? And that unfortunately there is still going to be children who experience poverty, even after, right, whatever is secured in this package is passed. We know that there will still be racial inequities, right? There still might be immigrant children who are left out of assistance, and that our federal poverty rate is very, as Megan touched upon, is too low, the threshold, right? So that many families who are with incomes even double the federal poverty rate are still experiencing hardship. So that means our work is not over, right? I didn't coin this, but child poverty is a long-term problem in need of a long-term solution. And so I can't take credit for it, but I always like to kind of frame it that way. And so I think it's kind of, we're at this moment, right, of some momentum around child poverty. I think it's getting some attention in the media as a result of the child tax credit payments, and rightfully so. And I hope that keeps up. But, I think that the time is now to say, we've made some of this progress. We want to maintain it and build upon it to make sure no child lives in poverty. And that's why we need this child poverty target, right? And we've seen in other countries that when they have targets, right, they have made more progress because they have this, this accountability, right, this goal that they've set for themselves, that then there's some political pressure, right, to then try to meet that goal. So we have, the fellow members of the Child Poverty Action Group long advocated to pass the Child Poverty Reduction Act, which is led by Congressman Danny Davis of Illinois and Senator Bob Casey of Pennsylvania. And that would not only codify a target, to address child poverty in this country, but it would also mandate the National Academy of Sciences to analyze and monitor progress on child poverty and file annual reports kind of around what policies are making an impact. So therefore, right, we have this, constant kind of reminder of how we're doing, and we have the evidence to show what's working. So therefore, if there's any efforts to try to backtrack, or backslide on the progress we've made, right, we have this evidence to use to push back against that and have some more accountability. So, I think this legislation has been around for a while, but the congressional bill leads and members of Child Poverty Action Group agree that kind of the time is now, right, to really to get this done, and so we don't lose momentum on the progress we're making, and again, we can continue it. So, I hope that the attendees on this webinar will take action to support that bill. There's many different ways you could do that. And I see Haley's putting some of the resources in the chat, which is great. So we have a letter that's already been signed by over 160 organizations that support this bill. You can add your organization's name to that. We have a link for you to do that from the Child Poverty Action Group website that we'll put in the chat, as well as we have an action alert where individuals can take action to contact their members of Congress to say, please support this bill and co-sponsor it. We are not trying to get this bill included in the reconciliation package, but we are trying to get it passed as quickly as possible and add to this list of co-sponsors. So I hope that your organization, if it doesn't already, will support, and if it does, that you'll use this opportunity to really push and say, please make this a priority and kind of build upon, again, the progress that we've already made. So I see it looks like we're starting to get some questions. So as we're going through those, do you guys have any, does anyone have any kind of additional thoughts on ways that people can make sure to weigh in around, what's being negotiated right now and what Congress can do?
Hey, Kara, I would just add, for those who are a little more comfortable with a general messaging, along with the child poverty message, that we have a chance here to really tackle a long-term problem. Just urging members of Congress to prioritize kids. There are a number of different programs that you've heard about, whether they're nutrition programs, immigration programs, tax credit programs, and other healthcare programs, for example, urging members of Congress to prioritize children as it comes down to the wire and they are making final decisions on this just transformational opportunity here. I would just add that.
Great, thanks, Michelle. And actually, Michelle, we've touched upon this, but if you can just really hit home why, it's really important that these improvements to the child tax credit are extended for the long term, right? That, we want to make sure they don't expire at all, but that, why a longer term extension is really important compared to a shorter term, and what it means for families who are trying to plan for their financial future, right? Really, how does it, change thinking of families when they know that these payments, right, might be continuing for the long term?
So I think I touched on this just a little bit, but that regular little bit of financial security can help families plan. And Jacqueline talked about, I heard her say cheerleading or, other events, but I've also heard so many different stories about how that regular payment already is just making a difference in helping to ensure ends meet. They can pay utility bills, they can put food on the table, and as I said, maybe plan a little bit into the future, knowing that you have this regular, flexible monthly income that you can use to uniquely fit the needs of your family. And I think taking that away, I think we know that the damage will be notable, and we might see a spike in child poverty. And so any progress we made, we might undo, and that just doesn't make any sense to reverse the significant investment. And then just, we are at such a pivotal moment. We have an opportunity to do something here that would be long-standing and, potentially eliminate child poverty altogether. So let's do that. Let's make that investment in our kids. As Jackie said, they're our future, and let's not miss this moment. So I hope that gives you somewhat of an on-point answer to your question.
Great, thank you. I'll give one last shout if anyone else has any other questions from the audience. But is there any other, there's a lot of things we need to do, right, to reduce child poverty, right, and to address child poverty. And so we've talked about a few today, right? We've talked about, the child tax credit, we've talked about nutrition assistance, we've talked about making sure, right, that all children, regardless of immigration status, can access it. Is there anything else that you guys, want to plug that we haven't touched upon today, knowing again that, there's a lot of things we need to be doing. I know that Jacqueline talked about affordable childcare, right, which is being negotiated. I know that, paid family and medical leave, right, robust paid family and medical leave is being addressed. So is there anything else you want to leave the audience with, since we have a few minutes that we didn't get a chance to address today?
I think, Kara, I would just add that one of the big changes that hasn't been in the spotlight is the expansion to the earned income tax credit. And a lot of what we've seen in the press or heard is about, the childless workers. But there's an additional provision in the American Rescue Plan that would expand the earned income tax credit for former foster youth and students experiencing homelessness. It would drop the age eligibility from 25 down to 18 for that population. And I think that is a community that really is in need of the support. And that's a provision that we're hoping stays in the bill and remains permanent and will really be helpful to a lot of people who most need it.
Great, thank you. And Jacqueline, did you want to say anything further?
Yes, I just wanted to say, speaking on like the monthly payments for the child tax credit payments, I was born in Germany, so for the beginning of my life, I was at the age of 9, I moved to the United States. But beforehand, it was just me, my mother, and my sister, which we resided in Germany. And my mom spoke of even now to this day, they have payments that they give to mothers with kids or families with kids every month. And she stated how much it helped her during the times of her caring for us. Like, I don't really remember a time when I was living in Germany that we struggled. My mom didn't have that problem because when she gave birth to us, they gave her a payment for like a year to a point where she could stay home, really show us love, care. And then they also gave her payments after that. And it really helped. We didn't see struggle until we came to the United States. So it was just, and my mom explained that to me. I'm like, well, why don't they do that here? And I'm like, I don't know. She was like, I don't know. They need to do it here because it would help. It would help so much. I mean, I don't know about all the other countries that are doing it, but I know about Germany. And they take care of, they put family first. So, it helped. It helped my mom. She was a single mother at the time. I didn't meet my dad till I was 9. So I could honestly say when I was a kid, I don't remember, like a young kid, I don't remember struggling. Only when I came to the United States, that's when I started to feel what struggle felt like. You know what I mean? And I don't mean to say that in a bad way, but it was just the payments that they were giving for mothers with kids or families with kids really helped. And so if they was to do that here, I believe it would help in the long run. That's all I had to say.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for making that point. We know, right, that so many other countries have these child benefits and invest so much more, in families with children and have had lower child poverty rates, right, to your point. we have had, and so it's a long time, right, that we're following their lead. So hopefully this is a start to us just doing that. So
Yeah.
thanks so much.
You're welcome.
Great. Well, we will give a few minutes back to our audience. I'll just wrap up to say, I know one of our audience members made the important point that investing in our children is not only the right thing to do, right, but it also makes smart economic sense. We know that from the National Academy of Sciences study that Michelle referenced, that child poverty costs our country upwards of $1 trillion a year. That's trillion with a T. So when we invest in our children, right, it really impacts all of us. It impacts our country's economic future, and as Jacqueline said, children are our future, right? So I really hope that this information we shared today helps give people some ammunition for ways, right, that we can make sure that we're prioritizing children in this upcoming spending or reconciliation package, as we call it, and then also we will be continuing to fight together even after this package passes. So thanks for everyone for joining. Again, the recording and materials will be circulated after to everyone who RSVP'd. And again, appreciate everyone hopping on. So hope everyone has a great rest of their afternoon. Thank you.